A Werewolf Shifter Romance by Lena, from Lena's Romance Library. Chapter 1. The Storm That Changed Everything. The storm hit Millbrook without warning, transforming the quiet mountain town into a battlefield of wind and ice. Elena Thorne pressed her face against the coffee shop window, watching trees bend at impossible angles while debris flew through the streets like vengeful spirits. The power had been out for 2 hours, leaving only the emergency battery lights casting eerie shadows across the empty cafe. "Should have listened to the weather reports," she muttered, pulling her cardigan tighter around her shoulders. But then again, she'd been running from one storm into another for the past 6 months. What was one more? The bell above the door chimed violently as someone stumbled inside, bringing with them a gust of freezing wind and the metallic scent of blood. Elena spun around, her heart hammering as she took in the figure before her. He was massive, easily 6'4" with shoulders that seemed to fill the doorframe. His dark hair was plastered to his skull by rain and melting snow, and his clothes were torn in places she tried not to look at too closely. But it was his eyes that made her breath catch. Even in the dim light, they seemed to glow with an otherworldly amber intensity. "Jesus, you're hurt," Elena breathed, moving toward him despite every instinct screaming at her to stay back. Blood seeped through his shirt in 3 distinct lines across his ribs. Claw marks. Her mind registered with disturbing clarity. The stranger's gaze locked onto hers, and for a moment, the howling wind outside seemed to quiet. His nostrils flared slightly, as if he were scenting the air, and something predatory flickered across his features. "I'm fine," he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through her chest. "Just need shelter until the storm passes." Elena's nursing training kicked in, overriding her fear. "You're bleeding through your shirt. Those wounds need attention before they get infected." She gestured toward one of the back booths. "Sit. I'll see what first aid supplies they have here." "I said I'm fine." The command in his voice was absolute, the kind that expected immediate obedience. But Elena had spent the last 6 months learning not to bow to men who thought their word was law. "And I said you're bleeding," she shot back, hands on her hips. "So unless you want to collapse from blood loss in the middle of a blizzard, you'll let me help you." For a long moment, they stared at each other in a battle of wills. Then, unexpectedly, the corner of his mouth quirked up in what might have been amusement. "Stubborn," he murmured, moving toward the booth with fluid grace that seemed wrong for someone his size. "I like that." Elena tried to ignore the way his voice made her skin prickle with awareness as she rummaged through the cafe's emergency kit. When she returned with antiseptic and bandages, he'd already stripped off his ruined shirt, revealing a torso that looked like it had been carved from marble and marked by warfare. The claw marks were deep but clean, already beginning to close in a way that made her frown. "These should be much worse," she said, dabbing antiseptic on the wounds. "What attacked you? A bear?" His muscles tensed under her touch. "Something like that." "In a blizzard? That's unusual behavior for—" She looked up and found his amber eyes fixed on her face with an intensity that made her forget what she was saying. This close, she could see flecks of gold in his irises, and the way his pupils seemed to dilate when she touched him. "You have gentle hands," he said quietly. "It's been a long time since anyone—" He trailed off, jaw tightening as if he'd said too much. Elena's heart did something complicated in her chest. There was something haunted in his expression. A loneliness she recognized from her own mirror. "What's your name?" she asked softly. "Kieran." He caught her wrist as she reached for more bandages, his skin fever-warm against hers. "Kieran Blackwood. And you're Elena." She went still. "How did you—" "Lucky guess." But his eyes told a different story. ancient and knowing in a way that made her pulse race for reasons that had nothing to do with fear. Thunder crashed overhead, but Elena barely heard it over the sound of her own heartbeat. Kieran's thumb traced across her wrist, finding her pulse point with unerring accuracy. His touch was gentle, almost reverent. But she could feel the leashed power in his grip. "You're not from around here," she said, though it came out more breathless than she'd intended. "No, I was traveling through when the storm hit." His gaze dropped to her lips for just a moment before snapping back to her eyes. "What about you? This doesn't feel like home for you either." Elena pulled back, suddenly aware of how close they were sitting. "What makes you say that?" "The way you hold yourself, like you're ready to run." His voice was understanding, not judgmental. "I recognize the posture. I've worn it myself." She wanted to deny it, but something about him invited honesty. Maybe it was the storm creating a pocket of intimacy in the dark cafe, or maybe it was the way he looked at her, like she was something precious he'd stumbled across unexpectedly. "I left someone," she admitted. "Someone who thought he owned me." Her hand moved unconsciously to her throat, where faint fingerprint bruises had finally faded. "I've been moving ever since, trying to find somewhere that feels safe." Kieran's expression darkened, and for a moment, she could have sworn she heard a low growl rumble in his chest. "Did he hurt you?" The protective fury in his voice sent warmth flooding through her. When was the last time someone had cared enough to be angry on her behalf? "It doesn't matter now. I'm never going back." "Good." The single word was fierce with conviction. A man who raises his hand to a woman isn't a man at all. They sat in comfortable silence as Elena finished bandaging his wounds, acutely aware of every place their skin touched. The storm raged outside, but inside the small cafe felt like a sanctuary removed from the rest of the world. "These are healing remarkably fast," she observed, smoothing the last piece of medical tape. "You must have excellent genetics." Something flickered across his features. Guilt, maybe. Or fear. Something like that. Before Elena could pursue the oddness in his tone, the emergency radio crackled to life. "Multiple reports of unusual animal activity in the area. Residents are advised to stay indoors and report any sightings to local authorities immediately." Kieran went rigid beside her, his head tilting in a way that reminded her of a wolf listening for distant pack calls. "I have to go." "What? You can't go out there. The storm is the least of anyone's worries tonight." He was already reaching for his torn shirt, movements suddenly urgent. "Lock the doors after I leave. Don't let anyone in until morning. No matter what you hear." Elena grabbed his arm as he stood. "Kieran, what's going on? What aren't you telling me?" For a moment, his carefully controlled facade cracked, and she saw something wild and desperate in his eyes. There are things in these mountains that hunt in storms like this. Things that would see someone like you as prey. Someone like me? Pure. The word came out rough, almost pained. Innocent. Everything they've forgotten how to be. The lights flickered back on suddenly, flooding the cafe with harsh fluorescent brightness. In the stark illumination, Elena could see details she'd missed before. The unnatural sharpness of his teeth, the way his eyes reflected light like an animal's, the barely healed scars that covered his arms like he'd lived through multiple battles. "What are you?" she whispered. Kieran closed his eyes briefly as if in pain. When he opened them again, they held a finality that made her chest tight. "Someone who should stay away from you." He headed for the door, then paused with his hand on the handle. "But Elena, when you hear the howling tonight, don't be afraid. Some of us still remember what we're supposed to protect." And then he was gone, vanishing into the storm like he'd never existed at all. Elena stood frozen in the middle of the cafe, her skin still tingling where he'd touched her, wondering if she'd just experienced the most dangerous, or the most important, encounter of her life. Outside, the wind carried something that might have been howling, wild and haunting, and impossibly close. Chapter 2. The hunter and the hunted Elena didn't sleep that night. She'd locked the cafe doors as Kieran had instructed, but every howl that echoed through the mountains made her question whether locks would be enough. By the time dawn broke gray and sullen over Millbrook, she'd consumed an entire pot of coffee and memorized every creak the old building made in the wind. The howling had been different. Not the distant, mournful cry of coyotes she was used to, but something deeper, more organized, more intentional. Several times throughout the night, she could have sworn the sounds formed a pattern, like some primal language being spoken in the darkness. When the cafe owner, Mrs. Chen, arrived at 7 a.m. to survey the storm damage, she found Elena still curled in the corner booth where she'd spent the night. "Honey, what are you doing here?" Mrs. Chen asked, shaking snow from her coat. "I told everyone to stay home until the roads were clear." "I got caught in the storm," Elena said, which was true enough. "A stranger took shelter here too. Tall man, dark hair, said his name was Kieran Blackwood. Do you know him?" Mrs. Chen's expression shifted, warmth replaced by something Elena couldn't quite read. "Blackwood, you said." "Yes. Why? Do you know the family?" "There are stories about the Blackwoods." Mrs. Chen busied herself with checking the coffee machines, not meeting Elena's eyes. Old stories. The kind people in mountain towns tell to keep their children from wandering too far into the woods. A chill ran down Elena's spine. "What kind of stories?" "The kind you shouldn't worry about, dear. I'm sure whoever you met was just a traveler passing through." But Mrs. Chen's hands shook slightly as she worked, and she kept glancing toward the windows as if expecting something to emerge from the tree line. Elena spent the morning helping clean up storm debris, but her thoughts kept returning to Kieran. The way his wounds had been healing impossibly fast. The predatory grace in his movements. The warning about things that hunted in storms. And those eyes. Golden amber eyes that seemed to see straight through to her soul. By afternoon, she couldn't stand the questions anymore. If there were stories about the Blackwoods, someone in town would know them. She made her way to the Millbrook Public Library, a tiny building that smelled of old books and wood polish. The librarian, an elderly woman named Dorothy, looked up from her desk with surprise. "My goodness, I didn't expect anyone today. Most folks are still cleaning up from the storm." "I'm researching local history," Elena said. "Specifically, I'm looking for information about a family called the Blackwoods." Dorothy's pen clattered to the floor. When she bent to retrieve it, Elena caught the way her hands trembled. "The Blackwoods? May I ask why?" "I met someone last night who said that was his surname. I'm curious about the family's history in the area." For a long moment, Dorothy studied Elena's face as if weighing how much to reveal. Finally, she stood and moved toward a locked cabinet behind her desk. "There are some old records that mention them, but I have to warn you, the Blackwoods' history in these mountains is complicated." She pulled out a leather-bound journal. Its pages yellowed with age. This belonged to the town's founder, Samuel Millbrook. He wrote about the early days, when the territory was still wild and dangerous. Elena opened the journal carefully, scanning the spidery handwriting until she found an entry dated 1847. "The Blackwood clan has agreed to our terms. In exchange for hunting rights in the deep forest, they will patrol the boundaries and keep the settlements safe from the wolves that have been plaguing our livestock." There is something strange about that family. The way they move through the woods without sound. How they seem to know things before they happen. But the attacks have stopped since their arrival, so I will not question Providence. "Hunters," Elena murmured. "They were hunters." "Of a sort." Dorothy sat down heavily. But Elena, dear, that was over a century ago. There haven't been any Blackwoods in these parts for decades. People say the bloodline died out. Elena flipped through more pages, finding scattered references to the family. Always in connection with wolf attacks, always described in terms that made them sound more legend than human. In 1892, young Thomas Blackwood brought down the rogue wolf that killed the Morrison boy. Strange how he found the beast so quickly, as if he knew exactly where it would be. In 1903, the Blackwood men have eyes like wolves themselves. Makes a person wonder what they become when they disappear into those deep woods for days at a time. Dorothy, Elena said slowly, what exactly did people think the Blackwoods were? The old woman glanced around nervously, then leaned closer. There were always whispers, stories about men who could track by scent alone, who could run for miles without tiring, who seemed to communicate with the wolves instead of just hunting them. Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Stories about families cursed to walk between the human world and something wilder. Elena's heart began to pound. Cursed how? Shape-shifting, Dorothy breathed. Werewolves, some called them. Protectors who paid the price for their power by never being fully human again. The journal trembled in Elena's hands. Kieran's impossible healing, his predatory awareness, the way he'd seemed to know things about her that no stranger should know. The warning about things that hunted in storms. But those are just stories, Dorothy added quickly, perhaps seeing the shock on Elena's face. Folk tales to explain why some people seem to belong more to the wilderness than to civilization. Elena barely heard her. She was thinking about amber eyes that reflected light like an animal's, about the way Kieran had tilted his head as if listening to sounds beyond human hearing, about the howling that had filled the night with an almost musical quality. I need to go, she said abruptly, closing the journal. Elena, wait. But she was already heading for the door, her mind racing. If the stories were true, if Kieran really was something other than human, then what did that mean for the connection she'd felt between them? The pull that had made her want to trust a dangerous stranger? And more importantly, if he'd been trying to protect her from something last night, what exactly was still out there in the woods? She was so lost in thought that she didn't notice the figure following her until she was halfway home. When she finally glanced back, her blood ran cold. A man stood at the edge of the tree line, watching her with an intensity that made her skin crawl. He was tall and lean, with silvering hair and pale eyes that seemed to cut right through her. Even from a distance, there was something predatory about his stillness, like a snake preparing to strike. Elena quickened her pace, but when she looked back again, he was gone, vanished as if he'd never been there at all. That night, as she lay in her small rental cabin listening to the wind in the pines, Elena found herself thinking about protection and predators, about the thin line between safety and danger, and about amber eyes that had looked at her like she was something worth defending. Chapter 3. Secrets in the Shadows. 3 days passed without any sign of Kieran, and Elena began to wonder if she'd imagined the entire encounter. But the bandages she'd used were gone from the cafe's first aid kit, and Mrs. Chen had been unusually quiet whenever Elena tried to bring up the storm, or the mysterious stranger who'd sought shelter. The feeling of being watched, however, hadn't faded. Elena caught glimpses of movement in her peripheral vision, shadows that seemed too tall to be natural, pale eyes that reflected light from impossible angles. Twice she'd come home to find her door unlocked when she was certain she'd secured it. Nothing was missing, but someone had been inside. She could smell it. A scent like winter and wild things that made the hair on the back of her neck stand up. On Thursday evening, she was walking home from her shift at the local clinic when she heard footsteps behind her. Not trying to be quiet, deliberately making noise, as if the person wanted her to know they were there. Elena turned to find the silver-haired man from the library approaching, his pale eyes fixed on her with uncomfortable intensity. Up close, she could see that he was older than she'd first thought, maybe in his 50s, but he moved with the fluid grace of someone much younger. "Miss Thorne," he said, his voice cultured and oddly formal. "I've been hoping to meet you." Every instinct screamed at her to run, but Elena held her ground. "Do I know you?" "Marcus Ashford." He stopped just close enough to invade her personal space without being overtly threatening. "I represent certain interests in this area. I understand you had an encounter with Kieran Blackwood during the storm." Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. "I don't know what you're talking about." Marcus smiled, revealing teeth that seemed just a little too sharp. "Please don't insult my intelligence. His scent is all over you, even after 3 days. He touched you, didn't he? Perhaps more than once." The intimate way he said it made Elena's skin crawl. "I think you have me confused with someone else." Elena Marie Thorne, age 26, formerly of Chicago, fled an abusive relationship with Richard Castellano 6 months ago and has been moving from town to town ever since. Marcus tilted his head, studying her like a specimen. "You're very pretty. I can see why he would be interested." Elena backed toward her cabin, fear clawing at her throat. "Stay away from me." "I'm afraid I can't do that." Marcus followed, matching her pace exactly. "You see, Miss Thorne, you've become involved in something much larger than yourself. The moment Kieran Blackwood laid hands on you, you became part of an ancient conflict." "I don't know what you're talking about." "Werewolves," Marcus said simply, watching her face for reaction. "Shapeshifters. The things that go bump in the night that most humans are smart enough to pretend don't exist." Elena's back hit her front door. "You're insane!" "Am I?" Marcus's eyes began to change, the pale blue darkening to silver, then to something that reflected light like polished metal. "Tell me, Miss Thorne, what did you think of those lovely golden eyes? The way his wounds healed? The inhuman grace with which he moved?" Elena fumbled for her keys, hands shaking. "Even if what you're saying were true, it has nothing to do with me." "Oh, but it does!" Marcus placed one hand on the door beside her head, trapping her. "You're what we call a catalyst, my dear. Pure enough to break curses, rare enough to start wars. And now that every supernatural creature within 100 miles can scent Kieran's claim on you..." "His what?" "The touch of a werewolf leaves a mark, Elena. Invisible to humans, but clear as daylight to our kind. He's marked you as his, whether he realizes it or not." Marcus leaned closer, his breath cold against her ear. "Which makes you very valuable indeed." Elena managed to get her key in the lock. "You're sick. I'm practical." Marcus stepped back, but his metallic eyes never left her face. "There are forces at work here that would see you dead before they'd let Kieran claim a human mate. But I'm prepared to offer you protection." "In exchange for what?" "Your cooperation. Help me find him, and I'll ensure your safety." Elena pushed through her door, then spun to face him. "And if I refuse?" Marcus smiled again, and this time Elena could see that his teeth had definitely changed, becoming more pronounced, more predatory. "Then you'll discover exactly what kinds of monsters hunt in these mountains. And I promise you, Miss Thorne, they're much worse than anything you've run from before." Elena slammed the door and threw the locks, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst. Through the window, she watched Marcus disappear into the darkness with inhuman speed. She was still standing there, trying to process what had just happened, when she heard a soft tap at her back door. Elena grabbed the largest knife from her kitchen and approached cautiously. "Who's there?" "It's me." Kieran's voice was low and urgent. "Let me in." Now! She yanked the door open to find him crouched on her back porch, his amber eyes scanning the tree line with predatory alertness. He was wearing different clothes, black jeans and a dark sweater that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders, but he still moved with that same fluid grace that marked him as something other than human. "Thank God," he said, pulling her inside and immediately locking the door behind him. "I could smell him all over your property. Did Marcus hurt you?" "Marcus? You know him?" Kieran's expression darkened. "He's what you'd call a pack enforcer. Old blood, old power, and no conscience whatsoever." His hands found her shoulders, turning her to face him. "Elena, I need you to listen very carefully. You're in danger." So he wasn't lying? About werewolves? About you? For a moment, Kieran's carefully controlled facade cracked, and she saw raw vulnerability in his eyes. No, he wasn't lying. His voice was barely above a whisper. "I should have stayed away, should have known better than to touch you. But you did touch me." Elena reached up to trace the line of his jaw, marveling at how right it felt to have him in her space. "And I'm glad you did." Kieran closed his eyes, leaning into her touch like a man dying of thirst. "You don't understand what this means, what I am." "Then show me." His eyes snapped open, golden and wild. "Elena." "Show me," she repeated firmly. "I'm tired of running from things I don't understand. If this is real, if you're real, then I want to know all of it." Kieran studied her face for a long moment, as if weighing her words against some internal struggle. Finally, he stepped back and began to pull off his sweater. "The change isn't pretty," he warned. "And once you've seen it, there's no going back to pretending I'm human." Elena lifted her chin. "I've never been good at pretending anyway." What happened next would replay in Elena's dreams for years to come. The way Kieran's human form seemed to dissolve and reshape itself, bones extending and reforming, muscles expanding beneath skin that sprouted thick, dark fur. The sound of transformation, part growl, part sigh, that spoke of pain and release in equal measure. When it was over, a massive wolf stood in her living room, easily the size of a small horse. Its fur was so dark it was almost black, and its eyes were the same impossible amber that had haunted her thoughts for days. Elena should have been terrified. Every rational part of her mind screamed that this was a predator, something that could kill her without effort. Instead, she took a step closer. The wolf, Kieran, went perfectly still, watching her approach with an intensity that made the air between them electric. When Elena reached out to touch the soft fur behind his ears, he made a sound that was part whine, part purr, leaning into her touch with desperate hunger. "You're beautiful," she whispered, and meant it. The transformation back to human form was quicker, and suddenly Kieran was kneeling on her floor, naked and breathing hard. Elena grabbed a blanket from the couch and wrapped it around his shoulders, acutely aware of every place their skin touched. "Now you know," he said, his voice rough with exhaustion. "I'm a monster, Elena. Everything Marcus told you about werewolves, about what I could do to you, it's all true." Elena knelt beside him, taking his face in her hands. "You're not a monster. You're someone who's been hurt, someone who's learned to hide what he really is." Her thumbs traced across his cheekbones. "I know what that feels like. You don't understand. The things I've done, the people I don't care," she said firmly. "Whatever happened before doesn't matter. What matters is who you are now, in this moment." Kieran's control finally broke. He pulled her against him, burying his face in her neck as his body shook with what might have been relief or despair. "He was right about one thing," he murmured against her skin. "I have marked you. Every werewolf for miles will be able to smell my claim on you." "And what does that mean?" It means you're mine to protect. His arms tightened around her. And I'm yours, if you'll have me. Elena pulled back to look into his eyes, seeing past the fear and self-loathing to the man underneath. The one who had risked exposure to warn her about danger, who had tried to stay away to keep her safe. "I'll have you," she whispered. "All of you." When Kieran kissed her, it was with the desperate hunger of someone who had been starving for human connection. Elena kissed him back with equal fervor, pouring all her loneliness and fear and hope into the contact between them. Outside, something howled in the distance. Not the musical call she'd heard during the storm, but something harsh and threatening. Kieran went rigid against her. "They've found us?" he said grimly. "Who?" "Marcus's pack." Kieran was already pulling on his clothes. "Movements efficient and deadly. And they're not here to talk." Chapter 4. The hunt begins. "How many?" Elena asked, surprised by how calm her voice sounded. Kieran's head tilted as he listened to sounds beyond human hearing. 6, maybe 7, moving in formation. He turned to her, his expression grim. "Elena, I need you to promise me something. No matter what happens tonight, you stay behind me. Don't try to help. Don't try to run unless I tell you to. Can you do that?" Elena nodded, though every instinct screamed at her to grab him and flee. "What do they want?" "You." Kieran's eyes flashed amber. Marcus wasn't lying about catalysts. "Humans with your purity are incredibly rare. In the wrong hands, your blood could be used to break ancient bindings, to free things that were locked away for good reason." A chill ran down Elena's spine. "My blood? It's more than that. You're genetically compatible with our kind in a way that most humans aren't. That's why my mark took so easily, why you're not afraid of what I am." Kieran moved to the window, peering through the curtains. A willing human mate can amplify a werewolf's power exponentially. Make us stronger, faster, harder to kill. "And if I'm unwilling?" Kieran's expression went dark. "Then they'll take what they need by force and leave you to die." The howling came again, closer now, and Elena could hear other sounds, the snap of branches, the whisper of movement through underbrush. They were being surrounded. "There's something else," Kieran said quietly. "Marcus isn't just any enforcer. He's what we call an alpha hunter, bred specifically to track and kill rogue werewolves. His pack has been hunting mine for over a century." "Your pack?" "The last of the Blackwoods." Kieran's smile was bitter. "My father, my brother, my cousin. Marcus picked them off one by one, claiming they were too dangerous to live. I'm the only one left." Elena's heart clenched at the pain in his voice. "Why didn't he kill you too?" "Because I ran." The admission seemed to cost him. "I was young, barely able to control my transformations. When Marcus came for us, I ran and let my family die fighting." "You were just a child." "I was a coward." Kieran turned back to face her, and Elena saw the weight of guilt he'd been carrying. "But not tonight. Tonight I stand and fight." The first window exploded inward in a shower of glass and silver. A massive gray wolf landed in Elena's living room, lips pulled back to reveal fangs that gleamed like knives. Behind it came another, then another, until her small cabin was filled with predators whose eyes glowed with inhuman intelligence. Kieran stepped in front of Elena, his own transformation already beginning. "Marcus!" he called. "Face me yourself, you coward." The gray wolf that had entered first shimmered and reformed into the silver-haired man Elena had met earlier. In the dim light, she could see that his features were more pronounced, more predatory than before. "Kieran Blackwood," Marcus said, his voice carrying an oddly formal tone. "You've led us quite a chase." Let her go, Kieran growled. This is between us. Marcus laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Oh, but she's the whole point, my dear boy. Do you have any idea what your little human represents? A catalyst, I know. More than that. Marcus began to circle them, his pack maintaining formation around the room. She's a bloodline anchor, the first one born in over 300 years. With her willing participation, a werewolf could found an entirely new pack. Create progeny that carry both human intelligence and wolf strength without the usual madness. Elena felt Kieran go rigid beside her. That's impossible. Is it? Tell me, how quickly did your mark take? How easily does she accept your true nature? Marcus's pale eyes fixed on Elena with hungry interest. She was made for us, Kieran. Made to elevate our kind beyond what we've ever been. She's not a tool for you to use. Isn't she? Marcus gestured to his pack, and they began to shift position, closing the circle tighter. The old bloodlines are dying out. Too much inbreeding, too much isolation. But with her, he smiled, revealing fangs, we could create something magnificent. Elena had heard enough. I have a say in this, she said loudly, stepping out from behind Kieran despite his protective growl. And I choose him. Marcus tilted his head, studying her with newfound interest. How refreshingly direct. But I'm afraid it's not that simple, my dear. You see, Kieran is the last of a bloodline that should have died out decades ago. His very existence is an affront to the natural order. The natural order according to who? According to those who understand what we are. What we're meant to be. Marcus's form began to blur at the edges, preparing for transformation. Kieran's line carries a genetic anomaly. They're too strong, too difficult to control. They mate for life, which makes them unreliable. They form emotional attachments to humans, which makes them weak. It makes them human, Elena shot back. Exactly. Marcus's smile was cold, and that's why they have to die. The attack came without warning. Marcus lunged for Elena while his pack converged on Kieran from all sides. But Elena had underestimated her protector. Kieran's transformation was so fast it seemed like magic, his wolf form intercepting Marcus mid-leap with a snarl that shook the walls. What followed was a ballet of violence unlike anything Elena had ever witnessed. Kieran moved like liquid death, using the confined space to his advantage, preventing the pack from surrounding him completely. But he was outnumbered, and Elena could see that he was already bleeding from multiple wounds. When one of Marcus's wolves broke away from the main fight and stalked toward her, Elena did the only thing she could think of. She grabbed the iron fire poker from beside her fireplace and swung it with all her strength. The wolf yelped and staggered, more surprised than hurt, but it was enough. Kieran broke free from his attackers long enough to tear the creature's throat out, then spun to face Marcus again. Impressive, Marcus said, having shifted back to human form. She's already learning to defend herself. Tell me, Miss Thorne, how does it feel to have blood on your hands? Elena looked down and realized he was right. The fire poker was stained dark, and her hands were shaking with adrenaline. But instead of horror, she felt a fierce satisfaction. She had protected what was hers. It feels like justice, she said. Marcus laughed. Oh, you are perfect. Kieran, you have no idea what a treasure you found. She's not yours to claim, Kieran snarled, his wolf form bristling with rage. But she could be? Marcus pulled something from his coat, a silver collar inscribed with symbols that seemed to writhe in the dim light. This is a binding collar, Kieran. Put it on willingly, submit to my authority, and I'll let your precious human live. Elena saw Kieran's wolf form go very still. And if I refuse? Then she dies slowly, and I take what I need from her corpse." Marcus's eyes glittered with malevolent glee. "The choice is yours." Elena watched horror dawn in Kieran's amber eyes. He was actually considering it, she realized. He would bind himself to a life of slavery to keep her safe. "No," she said firmly. Both Marcus and Kieran turned to stare at her. "I said no." Elena stepped forward, placing herself between Kieran and Marcus. "You want to know what my choice is? Here it is. I choose to fight." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Admirable, but foolish. You're human, Miss Thorne. What could you possibly—" Elena's hand closed around the silver collar, and the moment her skin touched the metal, the symbols flared with brilliant white light. The entire room filled with energy that made every werewolf present howl in pain, except for Kieran. "What?" Marcus staggered backward, his eyes wide with shock. "That's impossible. You're human." "Am I?" Elena could feel power coursing through her veins, ancient and pure and somehow familiar. The collar in her hands grew hot, its binding magic unraveling under her touch. "Or am I something else entirely?" The silver began to melt, dripping through her fingers like liquid moonlight. Where it touched the floor, flowers bloomed, impossible white blossoms that glowed with their own inner light. "A true catalyst," Marcus breathed. "Not just compatible with our kind, but something far older." His expression shifted from hunger to fear. "You're one of the firstborn." Elena didn't understand what he meant, but she could feel the truth of it resonating in her bones. Whatever was happening to her, whatever she was becoming, it felt like coming home after a lifetime of being lost. "Get out," she said, her voice carrying an authority that made Marcus's remaining pack members whimper and back toward the broken windows. "All of you. Now." "This isn't over," Marcus snarled, but Elena could see the fear in his pale eyes. "The council will hear of this. They'll come for both of you." "Let them come." Elena's power flared brighter, and Marcus actually flinched. "They'll find us ready." Marcus and his surviving pack members fled into the night, leaving Elena and Kieran alone in the wreckage of her living room. The moment they were gone, Elena's legs gave out, and she would have fallen if Kieran hadn't caught her. He'd shifted back to human form, and she could see wonder and something like awe in his amber eyes. "Elena, what just happened? What are you?" "I don't know," she whispered, exhaustion crashing over her like a wave. "But whatever it is, I think it's what you've been waiting for your whole life." Chapter 5. Ancient Blood, Ancient Power. Elena woke to the smell of coffee and bacon, and for a moment, she wondered if the previous night had been an elaborate nightmare. Then she tried to sit up and winced at the soreness in muscles she didn't remember using. "Easy," Kieran's voice came from somewhere nearby. "You've been asleep for 14 hours. Your body is still processing what happened." Elena opened her eyes to find herself in an unfamiliar bedroom, sunlight streaming through windows that looked out onto dense forest. Kieran sat in a chair beside the bed, fully dressed but looking like he hadn't slept at all. "Where are we?" she asked, accepting the coffee he offered with grateful hands. "My cabin, about 20 miles north of town." Kieran studied her face carefully. "How much do you remember about last night?" Elena took a sip of coffee and let the memories wash over her. The silver collar melting in her hands, the flowers blooming where the liquid metal touched the floor, the way Marcus had looked at her with something approaching terror. "All of it," she said quietly. "Marcus called me a firstborn. What does that mean?" Kieran was quiet for so long that Elena began to wonder if he would answer. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of old legends. The firstborn were the original humans who could bridge the gap between our world and theirs. They existed before the Great Separation, when magic was as natural as breathing. He leaned forward, his amber eyes intense. They're the reason werewolves exist at all. I don't understand. Thousands of years ago, there was no distinction between humans and what we now call supernatural creatures. Magic flowed freely, and those with the gift could take whatever form they chose. Kieran's hands clenched into fists. But power corrupts, and eventually, war broke out between those who wanted to use magic to dominate and those who wanted to protect the natural order. Elena set down her coffee cup, sensing this was important. What happened? The firstborn sacrificed themselves to create a barrier between the magical and mundane worlds. They split their essence, binding part of themselves to human form and part to the shapes of animals. That's where werewolves, shapeshifters, and other beings like us came from. We're the descendants of that sacrifice. And now Elena looked down at her hands, which still tingled with residual energy. The first true catalyst born in centuries. Someone who can bridge that gap again, who can access the power that was split apart so long ago. Kieran reached out to touch her cheek gently. Elena, do you understand what this means? You're not just compatible with my kind, you're the key to healing the rift that's existed for millennia. Elena felt the weight of destiny settling on her shoulders like a lead cloak. That's why Marcus wants me. Marcus represents the old guard, werewolves who believe the separation should remain permanent. They've built their power on the current system, and you threaten that. Kieran's expression darkened. But there are others who would use you differently, who would try to force a merger between worlds without considering the consequences. And what do you want? Elena asked quietly. Kieran was quiet for a moment, then smiled with devastating honesty. I want you to be safe. I want to wake up every morning knowing that you're happy and protected and free to choose your own path. His thumb traced across her lower lip. Everything else is secondary. Elena felt her heart do something complicated in her chest. When was the last time someone had put her well-being above their own agenda? Show me, she said impulsively. Show you what? Your world, the real world. Elena sat up straighter, ignoring the lingering soreness. If I'm some kind of bridge between two realities, then I need to understand both sides. Kieran hesitated. Elena, there are things out there that would kill me, capture me, use me for their own purposes. I know. Elena caught his hands in hers. But I can't spend the rest of my life hiding, and I can't make informed choices about this power if I don't understand what I'm dealing with. After a long moment, Kieran nodded. All right, but we do this my way. And the moment I sense danger, we leave. Agreed? Agreed. An hour later, they were hiking through forest so dense that Elena could barely see the sky. Kieran moved with the silent grace of his wolf form, even in human shape, occasionally stopping to test the air or listen to sounds she couldn't hear. There, he said finally, pointing to what looked like an ordinary grove of oak trees. Can you feel it? Elena focused, trying to access whatever had awakened in her the night before. At first, there was nothing. Then, like tuning into a radio frequency, she began to sense something else layered beneath the physical world. The trees weren't just trees. They were markers, guardians standing watch over something that pulsed with ancient power. And beyond them, there's something there, she breathed. Something hidden. Kieran smiled, pride evident in his expression. The old ways still work for you. Come on. He led her between the oaks, and Elena gasped as reality seemed to shimmer and refocus around them. What had appeared to be empty forest was actually a small settlement. Houses built into the living trees themselves, pathways that glowed with soft bioluminescence, gardens where flowers bloomed in colors that shouldn't exist. And everywhere, people who weren't quite human. Elena saw a woman with bark-like skin tending a garden of silver roses. A man whose eyes were the deep green of forest pools. Children who moved with liquid grace, their laughter carrying on wind that smelled of wildflowers and rain. "Welcome to Haven," Kieran said softly, "one of the last free settlements." An elderly woman approached them, her silver hair adorned with living vines that bloomed with tiny white flowers. When she looked at Elena, her eyes widened with something like recognition. "By the old trees," she whispered. "It's true. You've found one of the blood." "Grandmother Willow," Kieran said respectfully. "This is Elena. She manifested last night during an attack by Marcus Ashford's pack." The old woman, Grandmother Willow, circled Elena slowly, studying her with eyes that seemed far older than her apparent age. "The power runs strong in you, child, stronger than any we've seen since the Great Sundering." "Everyone keeps talking about power," Elena said, frustration creeping into her voice. "But no one will tell me what I'm supposed to do with it." Grandmother Willow smiled, her face creasing into a map of laugh lines. "What you're supposed to do is exactly what you choose to do. That's the point of free will, dear one. But surely there must be some kind of prophecy. Some destiny. Destinies are for people who lack the courage to forge their own paths." The old woman took Elena's hands in her gnarled ones. "You have a gift, yes, but gifts are meant to be used in service of love, not obligation." Elena felt some of the weight on her shoulders lift. "So I don't have to save the world?" "Oh, you might," Grandmother Willow said cheerfully, "but only if you want to." As they walked through Haven, Elena began to understand what Kieran meant about two worlds. This place existed in the spaces between what humans considered real, not hidden exactly, but somehow parallel to ordinary reality. She met pack leaders who had been fighting Marcus's kind for decades, healers who worked with plants that could cure diseases modern medicine hadn't even named, artists who painted with light itself, and all of them looked at her with the same expression, hope mixed with wariness, as if she were a loaded weapon that could either save them or destroy everything they'd built. "It's a lot of pressure," she said to Kieran as they sat beside a stream that flowed uphill. "Yes," he agreed simply. "But Elena, you need to understand. Most of these people have been hunted their entire lives. They've watched friends and family captured or killed by hunters like Marcus. You represent the possibility of something different. What if I'm not strong enough? What if I make the wrong choice?" Kieran turned to face her fully, his amber eyes serious. "Then you'll make the wrong choice, and we'll deal with the consequences together." He cupped her face in his hands. "Elena, I've been alone for so long that I'd forgotten what it felt like to have someone to protect. To have something worth fighting for besides mere survival." "You're not alone anymore," she said softly. "Neither are you." Kieran's thumb traced across her cheekbone. "Whatever comes next, whatever you decide to do with this power, I'm with you." Elena leaned into his touch, marveling at how right it felt to be here, in this impossible place, with this man who was so much more than human. For the first time in months, she felt like she belonged somewhere. But even as they kissed beside the uphill stream, surrounded by the gentle magic of Haven, Elena couldn't shake the feeling that their peace was temporary. Marcus had called someone called the Council, and somehow she doubted they would be as easily discouraged as he had been. The storm that had brought her and Kieran together was nothing compared to what was coming. Chapter 6. The Council's Judgment. The attack came at dawn, 3 days later. Elena woke to the sound of howling, not the wild, free song she'd grown to associate with Kieran's kind, but something harsh and regimented that spoke of military precision. Through the cabin window, she could see shapes moving through the forest with coordinated purpose. "Kieran," she whispered, shaking him awake. He was instantly alert, his head tilting as he listened to sounds beyond her hearing. "The council," he said grimly. "They're here." "How many?" "Too many." Kieran was already pulling on clothes, his movements efficient and deadly. "Elena, there's something I need to tell you, something I should have mentioned before." The tone in his voice made her stomach clench. "What?" "The council isn't just another pack. They're the governing body for all supernatural creatures in North America. When they make a judgment, it's considered final." Kieran met her eyes, and she saw fear there, not for himself, but for her. Marcus didn't just report what happened. He's called for a formal hearing. Elena felt cold seep into her bones. "A hearing about what?" "About whether you're too dangerous to live." The words hit her like a physical blow. "They want to kill me? For what? Defending myself. For being what you are. For having power they can't control." Kieran moved to the window, peering through a gap in the curtains. "The council maintains order through fear and strict hierarchy. You represent chaos to them, the possibility that everything they've built could change." A new voice spoke from the doorway, cultured and carrying absolute authority. "Not change, Miss Thorne. Evolution." Elena spun to find 3 figures standing in the cabin's main room, though she was certain the door had been locked. The speaker was a tall woman with silver-streaked hair and eyes like chips of winter sky. Behind her stood 2 men, one who radiated predatory stillness, the other whose very presence seemed to bend shadows around him. "Counselor Frost," Kieran said, moving protectively in front of Elena. "This is neutral territory." "There is no neutral territory when it comes to a potential extinction event," the woman, Counselor Frost, replied smoothly. "Miss Thorne, I am here to offer you a choice." "The last person who offered me a choice tried to kill me," Elena said, finding her voice. Counselor Frost smiled, an expression that held no warmth whatsoever. "Marcus Ashford is a useful tool, but tools sometimes break when subjected to forces beyond their design parameters. You, my dear, are a force that could reshape our entire world." "So I've heard. What's your offer?" "Join us willingly. Allow us to study your abilities, to understand the full extent of what you can do. In exchange, we'll ensure your safety and the safety of those you care about." Frost's gaze flicked to Kieran. "Including the last Blackwood." Elena felt power stirring in her chest, responding to the threat in the woman's words. "And if I refuse? Then we'll be forced to contain you by less pleasant means." The shadow-touched man stepped forward, and Elena caught a glimpse of something that wasn't quite human lurking behind his eyes. "Miss Thorne, you must understand. We've maintained the balance between our world and the human world for over 1,000 years. We cannot allow one individual, no matter how special, to upset that balance." "What if the balance is wrong?" Elena challenged. "What if the separation you're so desperate to maintain is actually causing more harm than good?" "Then that's a decision for wiser minds than yours," Frost said coldly. "You've been awakened for less than a week. Do you really think you understand the complexities of what you're dealing with?" "I understand that you're terrified," Elena shot back. "Terrified that someone might come along who doesn't need your permission to exist." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Careful, Miss Thorne. Your power may be impressive, but you're still mortal." "Actually," a new voice said from behind the council members, "that's not entirely accurate." Elena's heart leaped as Grandmother Willow materialized from what had appeared to be empty air, her aged face set in lines of quiet determination. Behind her came a dozen other figures from Haven, their eyes glowing with contained power. "Grandmother," Kieran breathed, "what are you doing here?" "What I should have done years ago," the old woman replied. "Standing up to bullies. Counselor Frost's composure cracked slightly. "This is none of your concern, Tree Singer." "Oh, but it is." Grandmother Willow moved to stand beside Elena, and suddenly the air hummed with ancient power. "You see, while you've been playing politics and making threats, I've been doing research." She reached into her robes and pulled out a scroll that seemed to be made of living light. "This is from the oldest archives, from before the Great Sundering. It tells a very interesting story about the firstborn, specifically about their role in supernatural society." Elena felt something shift in the room's energy. Even the council members seemed suddenly wary. "According to this," Grandmother Willow continued, unrolling the scroll with ceremonial care, "the firstborn weren't just bridges between worlds. They were judges, arbiters with the authority to determine whether the separation between realms should continue." "That's a myth," Frost said, but her voice lacked its earlier certainty. "Is it?" Grandmother Willow's eyes twinkled with dangerous mischief. "Miss Thorne, may I suggest an experiment?" Elena looked around the room, taking in the fear on the council members' faces, the hope on Kieran's, the quiet confidence radiating from the Haven residents. "What kind of experiment?" "Touch the council's binding sigil." Grandmother Willow pointed to a silver medallion hanging around Frost's neck. "If you're truly a firstborn, it should respond to your authority." "Don't!" Frost said sharply, her hand moving to cover the medallion. "That sigil contains power that could—" Elena was already moving. The moment her fingers touched the silver disc, the world exploded into light and sensation. She could feel everything, every supernatural creature within 100 miles, their fears and hopes and desperate desires for something better than the harsh order the council imposed. She could sense the ley lines that ran beneath the earth, the places where magic pooled and flowed like underground rivers. And most clearly of all, she could feel the wrongness of the separation. The way it twisted natural magic into something brittle and destructive. The way it forced beings who should be whole to fragment themselves into acceptable pieces. When the light faded, Counselor Frost was kneeling on the floor, her winter sky eyes wide with shock. The other council members had backed away, their faces pale with something approaching terror. "Impossible," Frost whispered. "The bloodline was broken. We made sure—" "You made sure of nothing," Elena said, her voice carrying an authority that seemed to come from the earth itself. "You've been pretending to have power that was never yours to claim." Elena could feel the weight of true responsibility settling on her shoulders. But this time it didn't feel crushing. It felt like coming home. "Here's my judgment," she continued, looking each council member in the eye. "The old ways are ending. The separation that's caused so much pain, so much fear, so much unnecessary conflict. It's done." "You can't," the shadow-touched man said desperately. "The humans aren't ready. They'll hunt us, destroy us." "Some will try," Elena acknowledged. "But others will learn. Others will adapt. And we'll help them." She turned to Kieran, seeing wonder and something like pride in his amber eyes. "What do you think? Ready to help build a new world?" Kieran's smile was radiant. "With you?" "I'm ready for anything." Chapter 7. The Price of Power. The council's retreat wasn't a surrender. It was a strategic withdrawal. Elena understood this the moment Counselor Frost rose from her knees, composure returning like armor settling into place. The acknowledgement of Elena's authority had been involuntary, but the woman's political instincts were clearly intact. "Very well," Frost said, her voice controlled despite the lingering shock in her winter blue eyes. "Your bloodline claim is legitimate. But Miss Thorne, even firstborn authority has limits." "Such as?" Elena asked, though part of her dreaded the answer. The power you accessed comes with a price. Every use of true authority ages your human form, burning through your mortal life force. Frost's smile was sharp as broken glass. How many years do you think you just spent claiming your birthright? Elena felt a chill that had nothing to do with temperature. What do you mean? Look in the mirror, my dear. Kieran was already moving, pulling Elena toward the cabin's small bathroom. In the mirror, Elena's reflection showed subtle but unmistakable changes. Fine lines around her eyes that hadn't been there an hour ago. Silver threads in her dark hair. A certain weathering to her features that spoke of time past. 10 years, Frost said from the doorway, her voice almost conversational. Perhaps 15. That's what claiming authority over the council's binding sigil cost you. Elena stared at her reflection, trying to process what she was seeing. She looked older, yes, but also somehow more herself, as if her features had finally settled into their intended form. The firstborn weren't immortal. Frost continued relentlessly. They were human, and power has always demanded sacrifice. Use your abilities freely, and you'll burn through a mortal lifespan in months. Then I'll use them carefully, Elena said, turning to face the counselor with steady determination. Will you? Frost tilted her head, studying Elena with renewed interest. Even when people you care about are in danger? Even when the choice is between your years and their lives? Elena felt Kieran's hand slip into hers, his fingers warm and reassuring. We'll face that when it comes. It's coming sooner than you think. Frost gestured to the shadow-touched man, who stepped forward with obvious reluctance. Tell them, Shade. The man, Shade, spoke in a voice like rustling leaves. There are others who know what you are now. Ancient things that have been sleeping since the Great Sundering. Your awakening has disturbed them. What kind of ancient things? Kieran asked, his protective instincts clearly triggered. Things that existed before the separation. Things that the firstborn originally sacrificed themselves to contain. Shade's form seemed to waver at the edges, as if he couldn't quite maintain human shape. They're stirring, testing the boundaries of their prisons. If they break free, the supernatural world and the human world will both burn, Frost finished coldly. This is why the separation exists, Miss Thorne. Not to maintain our power, but to protect both species from forces that would destroy them. Elena felt the weight of destiny pressing down on her again, but this time it came with clarity. Then I'll stop them. Even if it kills you? Even if it kills me. Frost studied Elena's face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Perhaps there's hope for you after all. Very well. The council will not interfere with your experiments. But when the old nightmares wake up, don't expect us to die cleaning up your mess. The 3 council members vanished as suddenly as they'd appeared, leaving Elena and Kieran alone with the Haven residents. Grandmother Willow approached Elena with a mixture of pride and concern. Child, she said gently, are you certain about this path? The power you carry comes with a heavy price. I'm certain about him, Elena said, squeezing Kieran's hand. Everything else we'll figure out as we go. Kieran lifted their joined hands to his lips, pressing a soft kiss to her knuckles. Elena, what Frost said about aging doesn't matter. Elena turned to face him fully, seeing the fear in his amber eyes. Kieran, I spent 26 years existing without really living. If I only have a few more years, I want to spend them doing something that matters. You matter, he said fiercely. Not what you can do, not the power you carry. You. Elena felt her heart expand until it seemed too large for her chest. Then help me make those years count. Over the next week, word of Elena's awakening spread through the supernatural community like wildfire. Some came seeking audience with the new firstborn, hoping she could solve old grievances or grant impossible wishes. Others came to test her, to see if the power she'd displayed was real or some elaborate deception. Elena learned to recognize the different types quickly. The desperate ones who clutched at any hope of change, the angry ones who saw her as a threat to their carefully built territories, the curious ones who simply wanted to understand what she represented. And beneath it all, a growing sense of unease. "Something's wrong," Kieran said on the 7th day, pacing the cabin with restless energy. "I can feel it in the forest. The animals are fleeing south. The birds have stopped singing." Elena looked up from the ancient text Grandmother Willow had brought her, a primer on firstborn abilities that made for sobering reading. "Wrong how?" "Like something is waking up that should stay asleep." Before Elena could respond, the cabin's windows began to rattle in their frames. Not from wind. There was no wind. The rattling came from something deeper, a vibration that seemed to rise from the earth itself. "It's starting," Grandmother Willow said, materializing in their living room with her usual disregard for locked doors. "The first of the old ones is stirring." Elena felt ice form in her veins. "Where?" "North, deep in the old growth forests where the barriers are thinnest." The elderly woman's face was grave. "Elena, I must ask you to consider." "No!" Elena stood, power already beginning to coil in her chest. "I'm not running. I'm not hiding. If something needs to be stopped, then I'll stop it. Even if it costs you years you don't have to spare?" Elena looked at Kieran, seeing her own determination reflected in his amber eyes. Especially then. Kieran stepped beside her, his hand finding hers. "We go together." "This isn't your fight," Elena said softly. "You are my fight," he replied with simple conviction. "Wherever you go, whatever you face, I'm with you." Elena felt power surge through her at his words, but this time it felt different. Stronger, but also steadier. As if having someone to fight beside made the magic itself more stable. "All right," she said, turning to Grandmother Willow. "Tell us what we're up against." The old woman smiled despite the gravity of the situation. "Something that's been sleeping since before humans learned to make fire. Something that the first of your kind died to contain. And now it's waking up because of me? Now it's waking up because the barriers are finally thin enough," Grandmother Willow corrected. "Your awakening was a symptom, not a cause. But you may be the only one who can send it back to sleep." Elena nodded, accepting the responsibility that came with her bloodline. "Then let's go wake the dead." As they prepared to leave for the northern forests, Elena caught her reflection in the window and was struck by how much she'd changed. Not just the physical aging, but something deeper. The frightened woman who'd fled Chicago 6 months ago was gone, replaced by someone who understood that some things were worth any price. Even the price of a lifetime. Chapter 8. The Ancient Enemy. The forest grew darker as they traveled north, not from lack of sunlight, but from something that seemed to absorb light itself. Ancient trees towered overhead, their branches intertwining to form a canopy so thick that Elena couldn't tell if it was day or night. The air tasted of copper and old magic, making her skin prickle with unease. "How much further?" she asked Grandmother Willow, who moved through the undergrowth with surprising agility for someone her age. "We're here," the old woman replied, stopping at what appeared to be an unremarkable clearing. "Can you feel it?" Elena focused, reaching out with senses she was still learning to use. At first, there was nothing but the normal pulse of life in the forest. Then, like a discordant note in a symphony, she felt it, something vast and alien pressing against the boundaries of reality. "It's huge," she breathed. How is something that big contained? Barely, Kieran said grimly. His wolf senses were clearly picking up more than her human ones. Elena, whatever's down there, it's not like anything I've ever encountered. It feels older than the mountains, older than memory. Grandmother Willow nodded gravely. The Devourers were the reason the Firstborn created the separation in the first place. They feed on the boundary between life and death, growing stronger with each soul they consume. Devourers? Elena asked, though she suspected she didn't want to know the answer. Imagine hunger given form and consciousness. Imagine something that exists solely to consume, to unmake everything it touches. The old woman's eyes were haunted. They were winning the war before your ancestors made their sacrifice. The ground beneath their feet began to tremble, and Elena could hear something that might have been breathing coming from far below. With each exhale, the temperature dropped another degree. The binding is failing, Grandmother Willow said urgently. Elena, if you're going to act, it has to be now. Elena knelt and pressed her palms to the earth, trying to understand the ancient magic that held the creature prisoner. What she found made her stomach clench with fear. The binding wasn't just weakening, it was being deliberately eroded from within. It's breaking itself free, she said. How long has it been working on this? Centuries, Grandmother Willow replied. Maybe longer. The Devourers are patient when they need to be. A crack appeared in the ground, spreading outward like a spider web. From the fissure came a sound that bypassed Elena's ears entirely, speaking directly to the primitive parts of her brain that remembered when humans were prey. Elena, Kieran said, his voice tight with controlled panic. Whatever you're going to do. The ground erupted. What emerged defied description, not because it was indescribable, but because human language lacked words for something so fundamentally wrong. It was shadow and substance, hunger and void, a living contradiction that hurt to perceive directly. The Devourer's attention fixed on Elena, and she felt its alien intelligence weighing her like a predator sizing up prey. When it spoke, the words formed inside her skull without bothering with sound. Firstborn. The mental voice was vast and cold and infinitely patient. I remember your kind. Delicious. Elena felt power surge through her in response to the threat, but this time it felt different. Wilder, less controlled. The aging that came with using her abilities accelerated, years burning away like paper in a fire. Elena, stop! Kieran caught her arm. You're aging too fast. She could feel it happening, her hair silvering completely, lines deepening around her eyes, her mortal form consuming itself to fuel the magic she was channeling. But the Devourer was still pulling itself free, and with each passing second it grew stronger. You cannot contain me as your ancestors did, it said, amusement coloring its mental voice. They were many and strong. You are one and dying. Maybe, Elena gasped, feeling decades slide away like water. But I'm not trying to contain you. She reached deeper into her power, past the surface abilities, into the core of what it meant to be firstborn. What she found there made her gasp with recognition. The firstborn hadn't just sacrificed themselves to create the separation between worlds. They had woven themselves into the fabric of reality itself, becoming part of the boundary they were trying to protect. And that meant Elena wasn't drawing on her own life force to fuel her magic. She was drawing on theirs. The realization came with a price. She could feel the weight of every firstborn who had ever lived, their memories and pain and desperate love for both worlds flooding through her. But it also came with their strength. Impossible, the Devourer said, and for the first time its mental voice carried uncertainty. Not impossible, Elena said, her voice carrying the authority of every firstborn who had ever stood against the darkness. Inevitable. She reached out, not with her hands, but with power that spanned dimensions, and began to weave. Not a binding this time. The Devourers had proven those could be broken. Instead, she wove something new. "Elena," Kieran said urgently, "your body." She could feel it happening. The strain of channeling so much power was burning through her mortal form at an incredible rate. Her hair had gone completely white, her skin weathering like old parchment. She probably had minutes left, maybe less. But it was enough. The weaving she created wasn't a prison. It was a transformation. She wrapped the Devourer in layer upon layer of possibility, changing its fundamental nature from destroyer to protector, from consumer to guardian. "What have you done?" the creature demanded, but its mental voice was already changing, becoming less alien, more comprehensible. "What should have been done long ago," Elena replied. "I've given you a choice." The transformation rippled outward, affecting not just the Devourer, but the entire barrier between worlds. Elena could feel the ancient separation beginning to dissolve, but gradually, carefully, in a way that would allow both sides to adapt. "Elena!" Kieran's voice seemed to come from very far away. "Stay with me." She tried to focus on his face, but her vision was becoming increasingly unreliable. Her body was failing, consumed by the magnitude of what she'd attempted. "Did it work?" she whispered. "See for yourself," Grandmother Willow said softly. Elena turned her failing gaze to where the Devourer had emerged and gasped. The creature was still there, but transformed. Where there had been hunger and void, now there was something that resembled a massive tree, its roots extending deep into the earth, its branches reaching toward the sky. "I understand," came a new voice, still vast but no longer cold. "You have given me purpose beyond consumption. I will guard the boundary as it changes, protect both worlds as they learn to coexist." Elena smiled, feeling a deep satisfaction despite her body's protests. "Good," she managed to say. That's what I hoped." Her legs gave out. But Kieran caught her before she could fall. When she looked up at him, she saw tears streaming down his face. "You're dying," he said, his voice breaking. "Elena, the power you used, it consumed too much." "I know." She reached up to touch his cheek, marveling at how young he looked compared to her rapidly aging reflection in his eyes. "But it was worth it." "No," Kieran said fiercely. "There has to be another way. Grandmother Willow, you know the old magic. There must be something." "There is," the elderly woman said quietly. "But the price?" "Name it," Kieran said without hesitation. Grandmother Willow looked between them, her ancient eyes sad. "The bond between you, it's stronger than most mating bonds. Strong enough to share not just power, but life force itself. If Kieran willingly gives half his lifespan to Elena..." "Done," Kieran said immediately. "Wait," Elena protested weakly. "You don't understand. Werewolves live for centuries. You'd be giving up hundreds of years." "For you? I'd give up everything." Kieran's amber eyes blazed with absolute conviction. "Elena, before I met you, I wasn't living anyway. I was just surviving. You gave me something worth protecting, worth fighting for." "But, no buts." Kieran leaned down and kissed her gently. "You chose to sacrifice yourself for 2 worlds. Let me sacrifice for the one person who matters more than anything." Elena felt tears slide down her weathered cheeks. "Are you sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." The ritual was surprisingly simple. Grandmother Willow spoke words in a language older than recorded history, while Kieran placed his hands over Elena's heart. Elena felt warmth flow into her. not just healing her failing body, but restoring years of life that had been burned away. When it was over, she looked decades younger, not quite back to her original age, but no longer dying. Kieran, meanwhile, looked exactly the same, though Elena thought she could see new silver threads in his dark hair. "How do you feel?" she asked him. "Like the luckiest man alive," he said, pulling her into his arms. "A few hundred years less lucky, but still the luckiest." Elena laughed, surprising herself. After everything they'd been through, she was still capable of joy. "I love you," she said, the words coming easily despite their magnitude. "I love you too," Kieran replied, "for however many years we have left." Chapter 9. A New Beginning. 6 months later, Elena stood on the porch of their new home, a cabin built at the edge of Haven, where the magical world met the mundane one. The boundary between realities had indeed begun to dissolve, but slowly, carefully, allowing both sides to adapt to the changes. There had been challenges, of course. Some humans reacted with fear when confronted with proof that supernatural creatures existed. Some supernatural beings resented the loss of their hidden status. But more often than Elena had dared hope, there was curiosity instead of hatred, wonder instead of terror. She was still aging more rapidly than normal whenever she used her firstborn abilities, but the burden was shared now. Kieran had insisted on bonding with her completely, creating a connection that allowed them to support each other through the demands of bridging two worlds. "Any regrets?" Kieran asked, emerging from the cabin with 2 cups of coffee. Elena considered the question seriously. She looked older than her years now, marked by the power she carried and the choices she'd made. Her life would be shorter than a normal human's, filled with responsibilities she'd never asked for. But she was free in a way she'd never been before. Free from fear, free from the need to hide what she was, free to build something meaningful with someone who understood her completely. "None," she said firmly. "You?" Kieran smiled, the expression transforming his face from merely handsome to something approaching divine. "Only that it took us so long to find each other." As they sat together watching the sun rise over a world that was slowly learning to accept magic as part of everyday life, Elena felt a deep contentment settle in her bones. She'd found her purpose, her home, and her heart's match all in one impossible storm. The future would bring new challenges. It always did. But whatever came next, they would face it together. Chapter 10. The Council's Return. 1 year after the Devourer's transformation, Elena was in the garden behind their cabin when she felt them coming. The familiar chill of political ambition wrapped in supernatural authority, approaching with the measured pace of those who believed themselves untouchable. The council had returned. "Kieran," she called, not turning from the silver roses she was tending. A gift from the transformed Devourer, who had become something of a gardening enthusiast in its new role as boundary guardian. He appeared beside her instantly, his wolf senses having detected the approaching delegation long before they came into view. "3 of them," he said quietly, "including Frost." "And?" Elena asked, though she could feel the answer in the way he held himself. "2 I don't recognize. Older power? Much older." Counselor Frost emerged from the tree line with her usual dramatic flair, but Elena barely noticed her. Her attention was fixed on the 2 figures flanking the familiar ice-blonde woman, beings so ancient that the air around them seemed to bend with the weight of accumulated years. "Miss Thorne," Frost said, her voice carrying less hostility than Elena remembered. "May we speak?" "You're speaking now," Elena replied calmly, not moving from her garden. The silver roses seemed to pulse with protective energy, responding to her emotional state. "These are Elder Counselors Nightwind and Starweaver," Frost continued, gesturing to her companions. "They've come to offer you a position." Elena finally looked up, studying the two ancient beings with interest. Nightwind appeared to be a tall man with skin like polished obsidian and eyes that held the depth of night sky. Starweaver seemed to shift between forms, sometimes appearing as an elderly woman, sometimes as something made of pure light. "What kind of position?" Elena asked. Elder Counselor Nightwind stepped forward, his voice carrying the resonance of distant thunder. "We offer you a seat on the council itself, a voice in governing the supernatural community during this time of transition." Elena felt Kieran go very still beside her. "And in exchange?" "Your agreement to moderate your use of firstborn abilities," Starweaver said, her form stabilizing into that of a silver-haired woman whose eyes held the wisdom of ages. "The changes you've initiated are proceeding faster than anticipated. Some guidance would be beneficial." Elena stood slowly, brushing dirt from her hands. "You want me to slow down the integration between worlds. We want you to consider the consequences," Frost said. "There have been incidents. Humans who've reacted violently to supernatural revelation. Supernatural beings who've used their newly acknowledged existence to prey on mortals. There have also been breakthroughs," Elena countered. "Healing advances from supernatural knowledge of plant medicine. Artistic collaborations that weren't possible before. Children born of mixed heritage who carry the best of both worlds." "Yes," Nightwind acknowledged. "But the failures threaten to overshadow the successes. Fear spreads faster than wonder." Elena looked to Kieran, seeing her own thoughts reflected in his amber eyes. They'd both been aware of the growing tensions, the incidents that made headlines and reinforced old prejudices. "What exactly are you proposing?" she asked. "A formal structure for integration," Starweaver explained. "Controlled revelation instead of random encounter. Training programs for both communities. Legal frameworks that protect everyone involved." "Bureaucracy," Elena said flatly. "Necessary bureaucracy," Frost insisted. "Elena, you have the power to tear down walls, but tearing down isn't the same as building up. What we're offering is a chance to build something lasting." Elena walked to the edge of her garden, where the silver roses gave way to ordinary flowers, a visible representation of the boundaries she'd been trying to dissolve. In the distance, she could see Haven's inhabitants going about their daily lives, most of them blissfully unaware of the political storm brewing around them. "There's something you're not telling me," she said finally. "What's the real reason you want me to join the council?" The three counselors exchanged glances, and Elena caught the scent of fear beneath their diplomatic composure. "There are others awakening," Nightwind admitted. "Other bloodlines thought lost, other powers stirring in response to what you've done." "And?" Elena prompted. "Not all of them share your progressive views," Starweaver said delicately. "Some remember the old wars, the reasons the separation was created in the first place. They see the integration you've begun as a threat to be eliminated." Elena felt ice form in her veins. "You're talking about opposition. Organized opposition." "We're talking about war," Frost said bluntly. "A war that could destroy both worlds if it's not prevented." The weight of responsibility settled on Elena's shoulders again, but this time it felt different. Not the crushing obligation she'd experienced when first learning about her heritage, but the considered acceptance of someone who understood both the costs and the necessity of action. "I'll consider your offer," she said finally. "But I have conditions." "Name them," Nightwind said immediately. "Kieran comes with me, as my equal, not my subordinate." Elena saw protest forming on Frost's lips and cut it off with a raised hand. "Non-negotiable." "I don't make decisions about supernatural law without input from someone who's lived as a supernatural being his entire life." "Agreed," Starweaver said before Frost could object. "Second condition, I retain the right to act independently if the council moves too slowly or in ways I believe are harmful. That defeats the purpose of having a council, Frost protested. No, Elena said firmly. That ensures the council remembers it serves the community, not the other way around. The three counselors conferred in whispers too quiet for human hearing, though Elena suspected Kieran could follow every word. Finally, Nightwind nodded. Acceptable. With the understanding that independent action carries personal responsibility for consequences. I've been carrying that responsibility since the moment I accepted what I am, Elena replied. What's my third condition? You haven't stated one yet, Starweaver observed. Elena smiled, feeling power coil in her chest like a living thing. The council operates in the open. No more shadows, no more secret meetings, no more decisions made without community input. If we're going to build something lasting, it has to be built on trust. The silence that followed was profound. Elena could practically hear the counselors' worldviews restructuring themselves around the implications of her demand. That's unprecedented, Frost said weakly. So is everything else that's happening, Elena pointed out. Unprecedented times require unprecedented solutions. The community isn't ready for that level of transparency, Nightwind protested. Then we'll help them get ready. Elena moved back to Kieran's side, taking his hand in hers. The age of ruling from the shadows is over. If supernatural beings want to be part of the world, they need to participate in governing it openly. Another whispered conference among the counselors, this one longer and more heated. Elena used the time to study their body language, their micro-expressions, the way they held themselves when they thought she wasn't paying attention. They were terrified, she realized. Not of her specifically, but of the changes she represented. These were beings who had spent centuries, possibly millennia, deriving their authority from secrecy and exclusivity. The idea of transparent governance threatened the very foundation of their power, which was exactly why it was necessary. Very well, Starweaver said finally. All three conditions are acceptable. When can you begin? I've already begun, Elena said simply. The question is when you'll catch up. As the council delegation departed, Elena felt Kieran's arms wrap around her from behind. Are you sure about this? He asked quietly. Taking on the political establishment while dealing with unknown enemies? Elena leaned back against his solid warmth, drawing strength from his presence. I'm sure about us. Everything else we'll figure out as we go. Together? He asked, pressing a kiss to the crown of her head. Always together, she confirmed. Besides, how hard can it be to revolutionize supernatural society while preventing an interdimensional war? Kieran's laughter rumbled through his chest, vibrating against her back. When you put it like that, it sounds almost easy. Elena turned in his arms, seeing her own determination reflected in his amber eyes. Easy or not, it needs to be done, and I can't think of anyone I'd rather do it with. As they kissed in their garden, surrounded by both ordinary flowers and impossible silver roses, Elena felt the future stretching out before them. Uncertain, challenging, but bright with possibility. The storm that had brought them together had passed, but the world they were building in its aftermath would be worth any price they had to pay. Chapter 11. The Ancient Pact. The war Elena feared began not with armies or declarations, but with whispers. Reports filtered in from across the continent. Supernatural communities going dark, communication networks failing, old bloodlines that had remained hidden for centuries suddenly going silent. When investigation teams were sent to check on them, they found empty settlements and traces of magic so ancient it made the air itself taste of copper and ash. It's coordinated, Kieran said, studying the map they'd covered with red pins marking each disappearance. Someone is systematically eliminating anyone who might support integration. Elena nodded grimly, feeling the weight of responsibility pressing down on her shoulders. 6 months as a council member had taught her that supernatural politics made mortal government look straightforward by comparison. Every decision carried the weight of centuries-old grudges, ancient territories, and powers that defied human understanding. "The question is who," she said, marking another location where an entire pack of werewolves had vanished overnight. And more importantly, how are they moving so quickly without detection? Before Kieran could answer, the temperature in their council chambers dropped 20 degrees in the span of a heartbeat. Elena's breath misted as she turned toward the source of the disturbance, her firstborn senses screaming warnings. A figure materialized from shadow itself, tall, ancient beyond measure, with features that seemed to shift between human and something far older. When it spoke, the voice carried the weight of eons. "Because, child, we never left." Counselor Frost, who had been reviewing reports across the room, went rigid with terror. Impossible. The Primarchs were banished before the Great Sundering. The ancient being smiled, revealing teeth like polished obsidian. Banished, yes. Destroyed, no. We have been waiting, watching, preparing for the day the barriers would weaken enough for our return. Elena felt power surge through her in response to the threat, but this time it felt muted, suppressed by the newcomer's presence. "You're behind the disappearances." "I am behind the cleansing," the Primarch corrected. "My name is Voidheart, and I am here to offer you a choice, Firstborn." "The last person who offered me a choice tried to kill me," Elena said, echoing her response to Marcus over a year ago. Voidheart's laugh was like the sound of glaciers cracking. "I have no interest in killing you, child. Your death would serve no purpose. Your submission, however." The ancient being gestured, and suddenly the air around Elena solidified into chains of pure darkness. She couldn't move, couldn't access her power, could barely breathe. "Let her go," Kieran snarled, his transformation beginning despite the Primarch's overwhelming presence. "Peace, young wolf," Voidheart said without taking his eyes off Elena. "I mean her no immediate harm. But she must understand the magnitude of her error." "What error?" Elena managed to gasp out. "The integration you've begun. The dissolution of barriers that were placed for good reason." Voidheart began to circle her, his form seeming to bend light around it. "Did you truly think the separation between worlds was created merely to prevent supernatural beings from frightening humans?" Elena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the Primarch's presence. "What other reason?" "To keep us contained." Voidheart's smile was terrible to behold. "The Firstborn didn't sacrifice themselves to protect both worlds, child. They sacrificed themselves to protect the human world from us." The implications hit Elena like a physical blow. The humans were never the ones who needed protecting. "Precisely. Your mortal ancestors were prey, nothing more. Food for beings like myself, who fed on life force, on fear, on the sweet terror of creatures who knew they were facing their doom." Voidheart's eyes glowed with hungry remembrance. The separation trapped us on the supernatural side, limited our feeding grounds to other magical beings. "And now that the barrier is weakening," Kieran said, his voice tight with understanding. "Now we can hunt as we were meant to," Voidheart confirmed. 7 billion humans, most of them completely unaware that predators like us exist. It will be a feast unlike any we've enjoyed in millennia. Elena struggled against her bonds, feeling them tighten in response. "I won't let you—" "You cannot stop us," Voidheart interrupted. "But you can limit the damage. Join us willingly. Use your authority to slow the integration. keep the humans ignorant and vulnerable, and we will moderate our feeding. And if I refuse, then we will kill every supernatural being who supports you, starting with your precious wolf." Voidheart's gaze flicked to Kieran with casual malevolence. "We will make the humans so terrified of magical creatures that they will beg for the barriers to be rebuilt. And then, when both worlds are paralyzed by fear and hatred, we will feed on the chaos until nothing remains." Elena felt rage building in her chest, burning through the Primarch's suppression like acid through steel. "There's a third option." "Oh?" Voidheart seemed amused. "Do enlighten me. I stop you here and now." Elena's power exploded outward, shattering the shadow chains and sending Voidheart staggering backward. But this time, instead of drawing on her own life force, or even the shared connection with Kieran, she reached deeper, into the network of firstborn consciousness that had spoken to her during the Devourer incident. "We are with you," came a chorus of ancient voices. "Use what we learned. Use what we paid for with our lives." Understanding flooded through Elena, along with knowledge that made her gasp with its implications. The firstborn hadn't just woven themselves into the barrier between worlds. They had woven themselves into reality itself, becoming part of the fundamental forces that governed existence. "Impossible," Voidheart said, but his voice carried uncertainty for the first time. The bloodline knowledge was lost, the techniques forgotten. "Nothing is forgotten," Elena said, her voice carrying harmonics that seemed to come from multiple throats. It was just waiting for someone worthy to remember. She began to weave, not just power, but reality itself. Around Voidheart, space began to fold and twist, creating a prison not of barriers but of impossible geometry that would contain him regardless of his strength. "You cannot hold me forever," the Primarch snarled, fighting against the dimensional constraints. "And there are others, dozens of us, all working toward the same goal." "Then I'll stop them too," Elena said simply. "At what cost?" Voidheart's laugh was bitter. "Each use of that level of power burns years from your life. How many Primarchs can you contain before you die of old age?" Elena felt the truth of his words in her bones. The technique she was using was incredibly costly, aging her mortal form at an exponential rate. She could feel decades sliding away like water, her hair silvering, her skin weathering. But before despair could take hold, she felt Kieran's hand slip into hers. Then Counselor Frost joined them, adding her strength to theirs. One by one, every supernatural being in the council chambers linked themselves to Elena, sharing the burden of the power she was channeling. "You see?" Elena said to Voidheart as his prison solidified around him. "That's the difference between us. You see other beings as food to be consumed. I see them as allies to stand beside." The Primarch's form began to fade as the dimensional prison carried him away from baseline reality. "This is not over, Firstborn. We are Legion, and we are patient." "So are we," Elena replied. "And we're done hiding." As Voidheart vanished completely, Elena felt the shared power of the council members flow through her, healing the damage caused by her reality-weaving technique. For the first time since awakening her abilities, using her power had actually strengthened her instead of aging her. "Well," Frost said shakily, "that was educational." "It was a warning," Elena corrected. "The real fight is just beginning." Kieran squeezed her hand, his amber eyes serious but unafraid. "Then we'd better get started." Elena nodded, looking around at the faces of beings who had just proved they were willing to share her burden, to stand with her against forces that threatened both worlds. "Send word to every supernatural community on the continent," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had just stared down primordial darkness and emerged victorious. "It's time to choose sides." As the council members dispersed to carry out her orders, Elena felt the weight of destiny settling on her shoulders one final time. But now it felt different. Not like a burden imposed from outside, but like a responsibility she had chosen to embrace. The storm that had brought her and Kieran together was nothing compared to what was coming. But this time, they wouldn't be facing it alone. This time, they had an army. Epilogue. After the storm. 5 years later. Elena stood on the balcony of the Unity Center, watching the bustling street below where humans and supernatural beings moved together in a harmony that still amazed her. A young werewolf helped an elderly human woman with her groceries. A fey artist painted portraits for tourists who no longer feared his pointed ears and otherworldly beauty. Children of mixed heritage played in the park across the street, their laughter carrying on wind that tasted of magic and possibility. The war with the Primarchs had lasted 3 years, fought in shadows and dimensions most humans never knew existed. They had won, but at a cost. Several council members lost, dozens of communities destroyed, and Elena herself aged beyond her natural years by the power she'd wielded. But they had built something beautiful from the ashes. Regrets? Kieran asked, joining her on the balcony with the same question he'd asked years ago in a different context. Elena considered it seriously, as she always did. She looked older than her 35 years now, her hair completely silver, her face marked by the weight of decisions that had shaped 2 worlds. Her lifespan would be shorter than a normal human's, consumed by the responsibility she'd accepted. But she was surrounded by love, by purpose, by the daily miracle of a world where no one had to hide what they were. None, she said, echoing her answer from that first morning after the storm. You? Kieran smiled, his own face showing the silver threads that came with shared power and shared years. Only that we waited so long to get started. Elena laughed, pulling him close as they watched their world, imperfect, complicated, but undeniably theirs, continue to grow and change below them. In the distance, storm clouds gathered on the horizon, but Elena no longer feared them. Storms, she had learned, were just nature's way of clearing the air for something better. And she and Kieran had become very good at weathering storms together.